Welcome to the Friendly Aussie Podcast.
3.
Hi there.
Hello.
Welcome to the Friendly Aussie Podcast. We're here with our 8th episode and we're talking to
Abe.
Abe.
Abe is from New Zealand and he runs the Cannabis Museum. So with everything happening in New Zealand next year, we thought this would probably be the best time to have a chat.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
No worries.
It's great to be on Australia's premier cannabis podcast.
I appreciate it.
Uh,
Premier, we'll use that.
As far as I know.
Ooh,
No,
moving forward.
don't forget the Herbalize. Those guys started before us.
Yeah, those guys are good.
But thank you.
we're aiming for that
So
every day.
Brisbane's premier
Yeah,
cannabis
reduce the
podcast.
scope.
Now they know where we are.
It's okay. They probably already know
already
that. Yeah.
So
You didn't want me to say the address of the place.
no. Please.
They already know. Again, ASIO is on our tails.
Yeah.
Alexa's probably listening to
Yeah,
us.
that's right.
All right, but let's bring it back a bit. You're an American that is in New Zealand who is in the cannabis industry.
It is an industry finally.
Emerging.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
growing. So how does an American get to New Zealand and start the New Zealand Cannabis Museum?
Yeah. What's your life story, man?
Oh well, yeah. It's a bit of a long story, but I'll give well, I'm pretty stoned, so it may not be a condensed version, but I'll try. My family actually immigrated to New Zealand when I was a teenager, and I hated it. And I wanted to leave New Zealand, and I did not want to shave and take out my piercings and wear a school uniform and all of that shit. And so I left home at age 16 and moved back to America on my own.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, I was already a stoner at this point, but when I was back in the U.S., I was trying to find better nugs, and there was a head shop in my neighborhood in Minneapolis that had some really like heady, dreadlocked, fucking major dudes that looked like they had the nugs. And so I wanted to apply for a job at that shop, but I was only 17 and you had to be 18 to sell the products and
Right.
presumably to work there as well, to buy the products and presumably to work there as well. So I lied about my age and I increased it by 1 year and said I was 18 when I was 17.
I see.
And yeah, same birth date, just changed it by a year. And I made a covering page for my CV that was 40 zigzags all stuck together to make like a giant paper that you could roll that still had
Wow.
one sticky side. And then I used the sticky side to stick it to my CV so you could like open it like a leaf. And they were impressed by that.
You really
and so
wanted that job.
They hired me. Yeah.
Do you have a picture of it?
I don't, but I could reproduce it. That
That would be
but
cool to see.
it would take a little bit of time.
We should reproduce that and make it a piece of content for people on how to get a job in the cannabis industry.
Now that is true. That will get you a fucking job in the Guinness. You know, at this early stage, maybe not in 2 or 5 years when it's all
Yeah.
corporate, but at this stage, yes.
Particularly in Australia, things aren't solidified yet. So
Yeah.
you can sort of get your foot in the door. Yeah.
But yeah, I got the job. I name dropped New Zealand in the CV as well, and everybody in America thinks New Zealand is really cool.
That's where the hobbits come from.
It's like the
What do
number
they
one
know about
bucket
New
list.
Zealand?
Yeah, Lord of the Rings, Flight of the Conchords. That's about it. Yeah, that's really.
Unfortunately.
It's
they
your
call
number
you guys
one bucket
Kiwis?
list. What's that?
Would they call? Would they know to call someone a Kiwi?
They would, yes,
would?
Ju-
Okay.
because of Flight of the Conchords. But they, it's everyone in America's number one bucket list destination, even if they don't actually know where it is. It's funny though because before Lord of the Rings, Americans did not know where New Zealand was.
Yeah, that makes
wow.
sense.
Like they were like,
Mistaken for
they thought
Australia.
it was in Africa. But after Lord of the Rings, there's been a lot of concerted tourism marketing, and they're
Yeah,
very
for sure.
cognizant of where it is now.
New Zealand is so beautiful. Like I don't know, been there a few times, and it's just having visited. There's such a diverse array of stuff going on. You can move like a couple kilometers down the road, and the landscape changes pretty radically.
Oh yeah, New Zealand's amazing. It is the number one tourist destination, which is why, jumping ahead, we'll go back to my story in a minute. The 2020 referendum is so awesome because
Yeah.
if it passes, I mean,
way.
okay, we,
a real shift.
tourism is kind of our thing over there. Like, it's our biggest industry. It's our biggest export, more than any sort of, primary industry or whatever.
Resources,
Yeah. So, we like to think we can go toe to toe with the majors in terms of tourism. And if we all of a sudden decide to become a cannabis tourism destination, well, other cannabis tourism destinations better watch out because
sure.
we've got the whole infrastructure. But what that means for Australians is that the cheapest flight that you can get is basically to the world's premier cannabis tourist destination. So,
That's quite a good point.
Yeah. So
I think it puts pressure on, I don't know, the whole industry in Australia to step up their game.
exactly. You guys have had the industry for longer. Like, where the hell is it?
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, so I guess maybe hopefully when this will be published at a strategic time, because anybody in Australia who listens to this actually doing something to make sure that the New Zealand referendum succeeds is actually in every Australian cannabis user's interest.
Yeah,
because it will put pressure on the Australian industry, like you said, and you've got a backup.
Fly over if you need to.
So, and we don't deport Australians, so you're good.
Wow. Great
But
point. I think there's a lot of differences that you can relate Australia to New Zealand. Like, you don't have the poisonous animals as much.
yeah, that's true.
Your
Yeah.
politicians aren't as shit.
Yep.
You've
Very
just got-
very different political spectrum. Very
Just
different.
got some good
I think
differences.
Our most right-wing politicians in New Zealand are like basically
almost social
would be called
democrats.
communists in
Yeah,
Australia.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Anyhow.
it's. I think it was. I don't know if it was the last federal election or the one that just went, but it was the first year that there was more migration to New Zealand for Aussies going to New Zealand than
Yeah.
New Zealanders coming
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
Australia.
I think for a
I
long
think it's
time,
tipped back now though,
Yeah.
because our economy's gone a bit shit.
That's
It's all
quite
about
right.
the money.
It is
you
about
know?
the money. All the Kiwis came here when their economy was
The
struggling.
thing about the Kiwis all coming here, and a lot of them come to Brisbane actually, so a lot of them will hear this.
Yeah,
and
for
I guess
sure.
that's another big shout out. I'll just put in a plug because the Whakamana Cannabis Museum is undergoing an expansion. We're doing an
Ooh.
equity crowdfunding project at the moment, and I'm sure we'll talk more about it later in the episode. But we really need to succeed, and basically any New Zealander in Australia can buy shares in this cannabis museum company through this crowdfunding project.
Brilliant.
It's a bit harder for Australians because you have to meet certain criteria,
Sure.
but they can always donate as well. And like I said,
Excellent.
it's in everyone's interest to see that we succeed so that we can lobby hard, for the next year and get this referendum over the line. But all those expat Kiwis can actually move the needle a bit, even though they're over here.
Yeah, got it.
But the thing that I never understood, and I know a lot of people come to Australia, then they move back to New Zealand, and it's like to get a better job, to get paid like heaps of money because there's fucking high wages here, but it is really expensive to live here
Oh,
also.
100%.
And so it's kind of
Cost of
like
living is high.
cancels out immediately, which is the one thing I didn't understand. But,
yeah, and I
but,
think some people
Is it
have
a
cottoned on.
lifestyle difference though? Maybe.
well, it is a heck of a lot warmer, I'll tell you that.
If you're into
but a
that
bit
kind of thing.
too warm in
Yeah.
the middle of the day.
Oh,
Yeah.
this last week.
It's been fucking crazy.
What?
It's
This
just
is
been
this is hotter than normal.
We've got the fires that have been rolling around the whole
Yeah.
country, right? And so it's been dry,
It's dry.
but then it's been really muggy, and then it's gotten cold as fuck at night occasionally.
Yeah, because you don't have any cloud cover. We've currently got like big cold fronts over all of Australia, so very like weird air currents.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess I was just saying how left-wing New Zealanders are, but of course, some of them move over here, and I have to apologize on behalf of all New Zealanders for Israel Folau in the context of what we're talking about.
Did you see the thing that you would have thought was an Onion article but wasn't today?
No, I didn't.
So Israel Folau blamed passing gay marriage as God's way of giving us the bushfires. as punishment.
Yeah, drought and bushfires.
Yeah, drought and bushfires.
I mean, that's just what I expect from a dude like Falau. He's just got some expert political analysis up his sleeve. He's always given us those zingers. Good old
This is a
Falau.
perfect example of somebody who could really benefit from a little more cannabis in their life.
Yeah, and maybe some education about it as
Actually
well.
meet God.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Let's get all biblical on it. But hey, we'll diverge back to my origin story. So
Yeah, do that.
I met up. I got the job at the head shop. I started working there. They did have the nugs, but it also came with the fact that they were like ex-deadheads who tripped acid all the time and owned like a festival campground. And so basically I got a lot more than I bargained for. And that set me on a political path. And I learned about the counterculture and legalization. And and through that process, I came to learn that New Zealand had just elected the world's first practicing Rastafarian member of parliament who rode a skateboard to parliament and had dreadlocks all the way down to the ground.
Fucking rad.
And that they were did a government commission that found that all of the harms of cannabis could be traced back to prohibition, and that decriminalization was sort of the only way to reduce the harms. This was back in 1999, 2000.
Right.
And so at that point, I thought, oh, well, maybe I should go back to New Zealand. That's pretty cool. And by the time I actually got my shit together to go back there, I arrived and I had started studying botany at the university in Minnesota. And I wanted to transfer to study botany in New Zealand, and I wanted to be in the South Island, in the wilderness. So I went to Dunedin.
Oh, nice.
And the same week that I arrived, 5 days earlier, there had been an election. And in that election in 2002, the coalition balance of power shifted from the Green Party to a centrist Christian party called United Future. And their leader, Peter Dunn, his only demand in the coalition negotiations was cancel the impending legalization of cannabis.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I arrived and I went to meet up with all the activists, and I was like, I'm here. I'm a, aspiring botanist. Let's do some cannabis industry. And they're like, oh, that's not happening anymore. And they were all real gutted, and they had spent all their energy and resources, and they were just like the whole rug ripped out from under them at the 11th hour. And they were just like didn't have the energy to fight back or to say anything. I was like, well, shouldn't you guys be making a big fuss about it? It's like, this is pretty shit. Like, they can't just do this.
Yeah.
Like, well, they did.
They did.
And so that was my entry into cannabis activism in New Zealand.
Like
and
18 something years ago.
yeah, and I had been an activist for a couple of years prior when I was working in the head shop, and I'd gotten dosed by these deadheads, and we went and hotboxed the Democratic Convention when it was in Minnesota as a protest because we observed the Million Marijuana March there, which in New Zealand they call J Day.
Right.
And it's kind of fizzled out as a global thing since it's legal in so many places now. For
sure.
But yeah, so that was
cool
where I cut my teeth with the, marching in the street and hotboxing places as a form of activism.
Yep.
And the first year that I was in New Zealand, I arrived in 2002, late in the year, right after the election. And then I had the summer, and then I went down to Dunedin to start at university there, and I met up with the local Normal chapter. Okay. I wanted to meet the stoners, and we needed to do something. And so I just kind of joined in them, and they were led by a very charismatic dude at the time who worked for the Green Party. And on the J Day there, the very first J Day that I was in New Zealand, we were having our big J Day in the square and smoking and banners and stuff. And then this guy Duncan sort of rallied us up, and he was like, okay, we're going on a march. And we just thought we'd march down the main street or around the octagon. Our main square is an octagon in Dunedin. Yeah. Okay. And so we just started following him with that herd mentality. And then at the last moment, he just turned a corner, and all of a sudden we were there at the police station. And everybody was like, and we were all outside the police station, but we were all kind of amped up, and we had the strength in numbers. So it wasn't like, it wasn't like people arrived gradually and then started to peel off. We were all there, and we just realized. And then before anybody could even kind of think I should leave, Duncan lit a joint and walked inside the station. And everybody was kind of like,
okay,
we can't just let him, go on a suicide mission by himself. So everybody else just streamed in with him.
Whoa.
And then other people brought out joints and pipes, and people started digging in the garden outside and planted some cannabis plants. And it was like this full on. And at the desk of the police station, they just they just ran behind the one-way mirror and shut the door, and were like hiding, and people were setting up bongs and plants on the
pot heathens.
Yeah, they didn't address it or they didn't try to do anything. They just sort of locked themselves in their little room, and we had a big session and hotboxed the main lobby of the central police station, and nothing happened. And then we kind of got our stuff, and everybody had their thing. And
You occupied that police station.
yeah, back in 2003. And
Wow.
in the newspaper the next day, the police said, "Oh, we were too busy. There was a rugby game on. There was drunk people everywhere. We had more important things to do."
All right.
Yeah, and so we thought, well, yeah, that's awesome. So we actually made a banner of that quote from the district commander, and we carried that around at every future protest saying, we have more important things to
That's
What do you think
amazing.
would happen if we did that here?
Ooh, well, I think the police in Queensland are pretty.
do. That's what I say. Whenever I say to
Aggressive.
an Australian, they're like, I don't think that would work here.
I don't think so.
But maybe, I mean,
Well, you don't know till you try, boys.
exactly.
But you need more than
lot of
two.
people.
Yeah, you need more than two.
You
Yeah.
would need- no, the problem is there was a rally in Brisbane. It was this year. It was around 420,
People don't turn up to
and
these things.
it was maybe 50 people tops, if that. Not even
Right.
50.
Well, you need to have more of you than cops, yes, because if there's less of you than them, then they can easily just arrest you.
Yeah, and as far as it goes, I mean, they're not scared to deploy 40 or 50 cops when there's a thing going on where someone's blocking a road.
Yeah.
So in Dunedin, where we did this, there's 200 police total.
Oh yeah, right.
So that was why it was possible. And there's only 50 on a shift at any one time.
For sure,
In the whole
okay.
city. So that why it was. But you kind of need to know those numbers for Brisbane.
Yeah, it is
Or
important.
maybe just start
It's a
in
big
a
city, which is highly-
provincial
Start in a
area.
small-
Yeah.
Nimbin. Just march into the Nimbin cop shop.
Well,
The funny thing
and
about
they
the
come in
Nimbin
and the
area
cops
is that
just
the cops from all around the Northern Rivers go to Nimbin.
But this is the thing. In New Zealand, we were always led to believe that Australia had been doing this for ages, and Nimbin they started the hotbox and never stopped, and they're it was the the autonomous micronation. But then you hear mixed signals from people who've actually been there.
Yeah, I think that, well, the experience for a lot of people that have been around that region for a long time is that there's a lot of pretenders in Nimbin. There's a lot of people who are either just trying to make a quick buck through the industry, the illegal market, and they'll usually not play by the rules. And
If you were a serious head baller, you would stay miles from there.
Yeah, that's the idea. There's a lot of I don't know, just weird mythology that's around Nimbin. And I think that the police can only do so much in the situations, but then they will raid the hemp embassy.
500 Damiana joints.
Yeah, they didn't find anything. But that being said, I want you to talk a little bit about the Cannabis Museum, how that came about.
Okay, so this is a continuation of the story. So
Kind of, yeah.
We hotboxed the police station a second time the next year on J Day again in 2004. Same thing again. This time we had way more people, and we sat down for 4 hours for a picnic with a 6-foot bong. You had to get up on the ladder to smoke it, and we just went. Yeah, we were went over the top, and we used the same strategy of not saying that we were doing it, and by this time. The previous year's leader had moved on, and so it was actually me and my buddy, the co-founder of the museum, who actually were coordinating and running the J-Day protest that year.
Brilliant.
And so we just said ambiguously to everyone, "Oh, we're going on a march," but we didn't say where. And then we marched down the main street and again turned at the last moment, at the closest point,
These
and
are good
ended up
strats.
at the police station, and everyone was there, and we just knew we had to lead them in. And it was, 3 or 4 times bigger than the previous year. And again, same reaction, no arrests, nothing, hiding in the room,
Wow.
saying they had more important things to do. And so at that point, we realized if you have the numbers and you are making a deliberate action about it, then the police will leave you alone. And I guess this is another important thing. This is an idiosyncrasy of New Zealand that does not apply to Australia.
Right.
New Zealand cops are totally afraid. It's part of the over wokeness of New Zealand. New Zealand cops are actually afraid to get involved in a protest
For
because
sure.
we actually have a one of the most important sort of events in New Zealand social history was the 1981 Springbok Tour,
Yeah.
when the South African rugby team came to play the All Blacks for some tests around the country,
Yeah.
and I think they asked that the Maori team members not play or something. There was some like sort of ultra racist, kowtowing that South Africa expected New Zealand to do, which they had previously done many times. But at this point in 1981, it was like, fuck no.
It's been like the end of the White Australia policy in Australia. Similar thing, because you have like decades and decades of a legacy, and then some white politician is like, okay, now it's going to end. It's been too long. It's been 30, 40, 50 years of this shit.
Yeah, well, I think from what I understand, and I learned a little bit about this in a documentary I recently watched, there was kind of like a resurgent sort of movement of like Maori identity in the late 70s.
Sure. Absolutely.
And then that happened to coincide with the Springbok tour was kind of like it was an expression of that newfound Maori identity, but because it wasn't about something that was happening in New Zealand, it was something that everyone could get behind. It didn't actually divide normal people in New Zealand that much, because like South Africa was so over the top racist. I guess.
No, I hear
but,
that.
So the New Zealand public actually donned motorcycle helmets and like plywood riot shields and fought the cops like hard.
Whoa.
And shut down the games and stopped the tour from happening.
Incredible.
And like flew light planes over it, dropping like flower bombs and all sorts of stuff. They like literally shut it down. But the cops were so hardcore that there's like all this archival footage of like just cops like going psych with batons like on normal average Kiwis.
Yeah.
And they just don't want to be on the wrong side of history again. So now they're like ultra cautious. So I think that's one of the difference between New Zealand cops and Australian cops is maybe they're not so cautiously woke. Yeah.
I think we've had events in the past here in Queensland that have been really police statey. Like we had the whole basically we've had the legacy of Bjelke Petersen in Queensland.
Who's that?
Joe Bjelke Petersen was basically the Premier of Queensland for 25 years. There's no upper house in the government of Queensland. So it's basically like if you control the majority, you don't have to listen to the other party at all. You can just pass whatever the fuck you want through for as long as you have party unity. And Bjelke Petersen was a full-on dictator and incredibly brutal. His police force and, incredibly corrupt as well. Like he basically stole elections. But his police force was really, really violent when it came to anti-nuclear activists and when it came to environmental activists. And that legacy is continuing today. You see that with the anti-protest laws. And it's
the entrenched police hierarchy is like, let's crack some hippie skull.
Yeah, exactly. And, you find that sort of continues and is reinforced by the establishment, the bureaucracy, the politicians who are in power, if only because I think there's a real connection between, what the police do, what the government does, and what the media espouses in this country. There's a real lockdown on information. There's a real domination and control of what kind of knowledge can be disseminated, particularly in Queensland, because you've got Rupert Murdoch that controls all of the papers. You've got the commercial TV stations, and you've got the ABC and SBS, which are government-run stations. So the vast majority of media that isn't new media is just fucking propaganda.
Believe me, I had to watch TV on the ferry over to Moreton Island today, Australian TV, and I was like, I haven't had a TV in 20 years, but even when I see TV in New Zealand, I'm pretty galled by it. But like, this was almost like, this reminded me of American TV.
For sure.
This was let's sell you some fucking useless poison shit that's going to end up in the landfill right away. Yeah.
Blatant.
Anyways, I digress. But so after we realized this idiosyncrasy of the New Zealand police, that we could get away with it if we were being deliberate about a political action, and that we had enough people that they would leave us alone, and it was like, well, why are we doing this once a year? Let's do it twice a year, quarterly, monthly, weekly, daily. I wanted to, it was like that, like I said with Niman, the idea of like a a micronation, you know, if that's what it takes, whatever it takes to be a place where you're allowed to fucking smoke weed without looking over your shoulder.
Right.
So if it has to start on one day and then expand out until it's a permanent territory.
So you're saying like a
And that's
temporary zone of autonomy.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I believe we've achieved with the museum is actually a permanent territory.
Wow.
And, you know, we're talking about annexing the land across the street in Christchurch, but that's maybe a bit down the track. But
Ambitions.
you know, you gotta keep the story arc going. But once we realized that we did try to do it twice a year, and we actually did it in a place that is a lot more militant police. In the town of Nelson, it's like the summer holiday town on the other end of the island, and that's where we were all for summer. All us activists, you know, all our parents and stuff, and lived up there, and people would work up there for summer in the fruit picking and stuff, and so we were all up there. So we're like, okay, we'll have a summer J Day in you know, around Christmas. We'll call it Merry Cannabis, and so we had a J Day style thing, and I had my beard back then, and I wore a Santa hat and like a red shirt and shorts and stuff. And but there was only like 15 of us.
I see.
And like there was like undercovers, like serious undercovers, like in the thing, like these dudes like with crew cuts, like
oh boy,
you know, like
that's dangerous.
And their camelbacks, like just kind of like, hey, do you know where to buy some cannabis? Like, no, sorry, bro. And so one person actually counter surveilled and like left and went around the protests and looked and saw them like texting and stuff, and then came back and was like, yep, definitely undercovers. And so a lot of us went and like stashed our shit in various places and came back to the protest. And then but we were actually like smoking a joint, because we're not going to do this and not smoke a joint. And as it was being passed, there was like, you know, these undercovers like swooped in with flying karate kicks trying to tackle the dude with the joint, and who just happened to be my co-founder of the museum, Julian Crawford. He is actually a black belt in karate. And so he managed to kind of like hold them off with all these crazy like spin moves and stuff, and they just could not get him. And they jumped on his younger brother because they had been passing the joint between each other, and like the police. Oh man, but that was, you know, that was just an example of, it's not a hard and fast rule. You got to have the numbers, you know, you got to kind of pick the location, right? And know it's your police
for sure.
But and at the J Day after the next year after, so we had hotboxed the police station 2 times in a row, and then in the 2005 J Day there was this like group of young sort of upstarts, and by that point, once we realized we could get away with it. We tried twice a year. When that didn't work, somebody else who wasn't in the core group but had, you know, come to all of these events and been to the meetings and heard all of the logic of let's do this all the time. Yeah. He just took it on himself to make a flyer for the Friday 420 session. Wow. At the Otago University on one day, on one particular Friday in about August of 2004. And then it went so well, we were like, all right, well, see you next Friday. And ever since then, to this day, there's people that meet up to smoke on campus. And that was like, you know, I mean, university students have had sessions on the quads of their universities for like,
time immemorial.
We didn't invent it, but we've been doing it solidly now. And that became the expansion of the, you know, well, why once a year? Let's do it once a week. And so, for sure. But to skip ahead a little bit, the next year of the J Day in 2005, there was this young sort of group of upstarts who had been coming to the 420s, the Friday 420s, and we were like trying to get rid of them because they looked underage. And they were like, you know, you're not my fucking dad, fuck off. And like they actually had better weed. And then it turned out they were like child prodigies who were at university, like above age. So we're like, fuck, well, we can't really say anything to you. But then they were like quite militant, and they wanted to go hotbox the police station again because they hadn't been at these previous 2 ones.
Oh, of course. They wanted to be on the phone.
Yeah, they're like, dude, let's do it. And we're like, no, you know, it's not going to work this time. Or we've done it. And they're like, no, we have to do it. And they're like, no, you've told everyone now. It only works if you don't tell people. No one's going to come if you do it. And they're like, nah, fuck it, we're doing it. And they're like, everybody, we're going to the police station. Who's with us? It's just the 3 of them. No, but he was like, no, we're not going with you to the police station.
So that didn't
and then
happen
they
that
like
year.
went in there and smoked in the police station, the three of them.
Ooh.
And cops came out and arrested them and
Damn.
fucking took them to the cells and was like, you guys, what the fuck are you doing? And just held them there for like 8 hours and then was like, just go, you idiots. But so, yeah, again, you can't just rock up in Hotbox Police Station. You kind of have to.
I'm glad we have
planned out a
that
little
disclaimer
bit, yeah.
there. It's important.
But I do encourage some Brisbane resident to actually give it a try.
Direct actions are
Yeah,
definitely.
and just
The Milton headquarters, man.
Don't let them know. They can't know. All right.
But we do have the 420 protests that go on every year in Australia. Melbourne and Sydney do it really well. Brisbane's is normally pretty small.
Yeah, the big cities.
I've heard of the Melbourne one.
Melbourne gets like 4,000 to 6,000 people, I'm pretty sure, which is cool. There's a lot of chatter about it coming off across negatively within public perception, which I kind of relate to. I can understand, seeing 6,000.
Well, because it's only people with nothing to lose that turn up to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Don't exactly inspire
that's
aspirational. Yeah.
And
Funnily enough, though, this guy who was one of the people these young upstarts who got arrested, he moved to Melbourne.
Yeah.
And he actually went to these Melbourne 420s when they first started out. And he kind of, from what I understand, had a bit of influence in sort of winding them up about it, using the experience of New Zealand and saying, this is what we do, this is what we've done, and so there was some connection there. And there's Dunedin to Melbourne is like a rite of passage, basically.
Yeah.
anyone in Australia to Melbourne is a right. Really, like
People just fuck off to Melbourne. Here, man.
yeah,
That's
it's
pretty
like,
cool. Yeah.
you got problems, go to Melbourne. Have a couple more, but you'll have more fun.
Hey,
Yeah,
well, I
yeah.
went there recently, last year, and I found bud very easily, and it was very high quality.
Oh yeah,
And
Melbourne has awesome buds.
I was also in Sydney, and that was not very similar.
Yeah, I've tried to find bud in Sydney before, and you kind of need to know what you're on about. Like, I was using Leafton, and it just wasn't working out for me. I was finding scammers and
Oh,
and people
so
who
many
couldn't help
scammers.
me.
But Brisbane, I have to say, actually beat Melbourne's time
Ooh.
for me finding bud easily. So
Brisbane ain't bad.
I'll sing praises.
Brisbane
Yeah.
ain't bad. There's times, and there have been times in the past where it seems like the whole place is dry, but it's probably just my ability to find it more than anything.
Yes,
It's
yes.
just knowing how to communicate. Just knowing how to communicate, I think, is like the biggest thing.
Yeah, it's important.
And
Make those
also,
connections.
it kind of comes down to who you are. Like no one really wants to deal with someone they have absolutely no idea with. But if you've got some sort of backing behind you,
If
and
you're the
like,
curator of the New Zealand Cannabis Museum,
I
you
mean,
can kind of
I
just
don't
rock into places that are
Just be
usually
like, "What up?"
I'm not a narc, dude. I'm not. I'm going super deep on the long game.
Oh man,
25 years undercover.
my biggest fear.
Potentially, I mean, who knows? You want to come out after 25 years on this podcast? It would be a real honor.
I was thinking we wrap this cast up, and then we'll do another because this is kind of like your intro story, and I think we can go into like another one where we can kind of go more about the museum and the pledging because we're at like 30 minutes. I'm like,
Right. Sure.
How
Do
do
you
you feel
think we
about
got to
that?
wrap it up?
Yeah, we could go into the next episode from here. I mean, if you want, you can just like continue.